Warning, this episode is not for haters. If you are a hater, just move along to the next podcast in your feed. Haters may be triggered by this content. Seriously, just skip the episode. You don't want to be triggered. You don't want to end up upset. Just move along. It'll be better for you, better for us, better for the world.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee with Comrades, a podcast discussing current events, theory, and action through a radical lens. What's up, y'all? This week on Coffee with Comrades, we are pleased to present possibly the silliest and most wholesome episode of the show that we've ever recorded. But before we get there, a couple quick announcements. First off, Coffee with Comrades is proud to be part of the Rev Left Radio Federation and the Channel Zero Network. Check out this jingle from some of our affiliates on the Channel Zero Network.
Ransom notes. Anarchist and anti-authoritarian music podcast.
That's going to come out every month.
Ransom what?
So what's your ultimate goal, I guess, in this?
We out for
the
rising up against the oppressor.
The attitude that you see in hip-hop.
Let me give you a sample of some of the lyrics that had some of the older ladies among the stockholders white with dismay.
Go to ransomnotes.libsyn.com
or get them from the Channel Zero Network.
Over the past couple weeks, we've been actively trying to collaborate with other members of the CZN. Just last week, we sat down with the CZN Spotlight of the Month, Doomer versus Bloomer, to chat about grief and community organizing in the age of COVID-19. Doomer vs. Bloomer is a stellar show, and if you haven't checked it out, literally stop whatever it is you're doing, put this episode on pause, and go listen to their awesome program. The shtick is fairly straightforward. Each episode, Franz, the dewy-eyed Bloomer, faces off against Kami, the jaded and cynical Doomer, on a topic of discussion. Who wins? Well, that's up for you to decide. Check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Speaking of CZN shows, I am joined today by my friend and comrade Liz of Rebel Steps, who are just winding down their second season. Check out this trailer for their show.
Rebel Steps is a podcast about taking action. Season 1 offered insights into how individuals can join movements. Season 2 focuses on the ways people can work together to build these movements. Organizing in groups presents many challenges. How do you care for each other and protect each other in the midst of political struggle? How do you lift up the voices of everyone in your group? How do you work through the inevitable disagreements? All of these questions have complicated answers. As I explore these questions, you'll hear voices and stories from my community in New York City, spotlighting a range of organizers from the Metropolitan Anarchist Coordinating Council, Outlive Them, Pop Gem, Democratic Socialists of America Libertarian Socialist Caucus, and more. Just like the first season, I return to Paulo Freire's quote, "What can we do today so that we can do tomorrow what we cannot do today?" But this time with the realization that building our capacity will necessarily happen alongside others. Find Rebel Steps on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on Twitter or Patreon.
Longtime listeners of the show will know we collaborated with Liz and her sister, Amy, on episode 73 of Coffee with Comrades, Every Countdown Ends at Zero. I was stoked to invite Liz back on the program to talk about our mutual affection for Animal Crossing: New Horizons. Today's show was honestly a blast to record. We both laughed a lot, joked around, and explored the politics of ACNH. So is New Horizons a capitalist hellscape of landlords and stalk markets, or a communist anti-anti-utopia of radical possibility? Stay tuned to the very end of the episode to find out. Without further ado, please enjoy episode 84 of Coffee with Comrades, What New Horizons Await, featuring Liz from Rebel Steps. Have you played the new update yet?
I have played the new update a little bit, just a little bit.
What do you think?
I mean, I'm into it. You know, obviously, I woke up early this morning and started planting some flowers and stuff. So.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Well, today on Coffee with Comrades, we are going to be talking about Animal Crossing New Horizons. For some reason, Liz has agreed to come on the program and talk with me about it. Liz from Rebel Steps, what's up, my friend?
You know, just enjoying quarantine with a little bit of video gaming. I'm not a big gamer, but I'm a huge fan of Animal Crossing New Horizons, as you know, since we've played together. So I was excited to talk about my newfound love for this game.
I keep going back and forth and are we really gonna do this? Because on its face, this is probably the single silliest concept for an episode of Coffee with Comrades that I think I've ever come up with. Hopefully at worst, maybe this will just be a goofy conversation between friends without any brilliant insights into the structures of our lives. But maybe it could also be the single most wholesome, heartwarming episode of Coffee with Comrades ever. Maybe, or then again, it could just be a total shitpost. Who knows? I don't know. But I'm excited to talk about the game with you nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the reasons I was down to do this is that in the middle of this quarantine, everything has been very serious, obviously, for good reason. And as you know, Rebel Steps itself is a very earnest podcast, maybe an excruciatingly earnest podcast, but maybe
wholesome content.
Maybe now more than ever, it's a good time to have sort of a chiller episode, and that's what I've been using Animal Crossing for anyway, to sort of unplug a little bit and smell the roses, literally, in the game.
Literally. Well, unless you've been living under a rock, Animal Crossing New Horizons has been an explosively popular video game. If you're listening to this and you haven't played New Horizons, or like me, you have never played an Animal Crossing game in the past, the premise is relatively simple. In this edition of the game, you move onto a deserted island with a grubby little capitalist named Tom Nook, who, brings two other random villagers with you, and you just start to make a life for yourselves. You're basically free to do whatever you like. You can plant flowers, you can go for walks, you can fish, catch bugs, build structures, populate a museum, go for art dives. You can collect fossils. It's ostensibly that's all there is to it, is just doing whatever brings you pleasure or joy in that particular moment. And yet, and this is why I wanted to talk about it with you, Liz, buried within the framing and the mechanics of the game, flawed though they may be, and we're going to talk about some of our legitimate criticisms, there's some interesting insights about the human condition, and especially during this particular moment that we're in with COVID-19 and with the social alienation, with the, quarantining of human beings in discrete relegated places. It's interesting how this game has brought people together in some interesting ways and created and facilitated interesting dialogues about where we're at in the world currently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of positive things to find on it, as you'll see in this conversation. I think it's fun to imagine a world where, we could do whatever we wanted. We could fish sometimes, and we could do DIY crafts, and we could invite each other over to each other's islands and give each other plants as presents. This is the world that I want to live in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and obscenely, I've spent way too many hours living in this world for the past couple of weeks, but let's talk a little bit about some of the criticisms of the game before we actually jump into the whole game itself. So I guess one of the places that we could maybe potentially talk about first is there's no real conflict in the game. It's a very blasé, happy-go-lucky kind of game, and I think that's sort of the appeal. But I also think that there's something about, and not in this weird masochistic way, but I think there's something about conflict that really heightens the importance of human connection, and raises the stakes of why we should go through the world and do things, right? I kind of tend to subscribe to a kind of a materialistic existentialism that kind of looks at the world and says, well, there's no like meaning or purpose like save that which we create for ourselves. And so, you know, one of the ways that we can create, I guess, meaning or purpose for our lives is by coming into conflict with forces of injustice or forces of oppression or colonization or white supremacy or misogyny, whatever it might be, and doing battle with them. And there's not really an opportunity to do that in this game. It's a very idyllic game, but I also feel like that might be sort of some of the follies of liberal kind of ideas about utopianism.
Yeah, well, I think, as I mentioned, definitely been using this as sort of an escape hatch over the past couple weeks when everything feels really bad outside and I'm in conflict with, for example, my landlord. It feels nice.
Yeah, so can you tell me what happened? So we're recording today on, today's the 23rd of April, and you guys just put up a thread on the Rebel Steps Twitter. Can you talk about what happened? I'm curious.
Oh yeah, literally like an hour before this, my landlord sent somebody into our building to serve us at our apartment door. So they gave them a key to the front door. Like, we're a very small brownstone. There's technically 3 units, but she has 2 illegal units, is a fun fact about my building. So she gave someone a key and then sent them into the apartment building to serve us. And it was very disorienting because no one's supposed to be at my door in general. Like, no one comes into the building, not even like, you know, male people come into the building or anything. Yeah, so not cool. She also, like, we were just asking for, in my opinion, a fairly reasonable discount. And instead of interacting with our emails about that, she just immediately escalated to legal action, which is unpleasant. But that's why you can't just have a nice conversation with your landlord. So I think part of the reason that I'm so into Animal Crossing right now is that there isn't conflict, because I'm just like, wow, there's so much conflict going on in the real world right now that I'm really enjoying this world where everyone gets along, you know? And that's that's something I like about it. I also I think that's part of the thing I don't like about video games is, like, I don't like the idea of, like, dying. Like, I always get frustrated when I get killed or something like that in video games. And in this game, there's just, like, you can just keep going forever. You don't have to eat. You don't have to do anything.
Die.
You cannot die. You cannot die. If you try and build a cliff in a place where it could, like, hurt you, or, like, a tree could fall on you, the game will be like, you can't do that. So, and for me, this is checking a lot of boxes right now.
I feel that. Well, one of the other kind of critiques that I've kind of been thinking through as we were preparing for this episode, like, the game doesn't really grapple or think about land or place or space, especially in, like, the framework of colonization. And there's no real ramifications for settler colonialism. You just, like, move into a deserted island. It's idyllic. It's perfect. It's deserted. No one's there. And you start building on there. You know, obviously, I don't think it's fair to expect, like, a kid's game to fucking, you know, grapple with the ramifications of settler colonialism. But at the same time, it did kind of rub me the wrong way in a certain context, especially because there is, like, a museum where you curate things, where you collect animals or fossils or pieces of artwork now with this new update. And so I'm curious if you had given any thought to that as well.
Yeah, it does sort of, like, play into, I think, like, settlers, like, myth of where they came from. Like, oh, we just moved to a fertile land and then everything was amazing. So I think it's fair to point it out, because people do have that impression of how things worked when, like, people came. But one of the things that I did want to point out is that since you can do anything you want in this game, you can actually bring that decolonial lens to your island. So somebody actually made a decolonize this place art design that they had put up in front of their museum, and they had tweeted it with just like, oh, just having a little protest at the local museum. So So I can send you the link to that too. And I thought that was really cute. And that, I think we'll get into that a little bit when we're talking about things we like about the game. You can do whatever you want. So, you can put up whatever sort of decolonial signage and acknowledgments that you want to put on there. Bring it to the island.
Totally. Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the wild things is just how open the game is, which is at times kind of like paralyzing because you're like, okay, like, well, what do I do now? But like it like that instigates a certain form of creativity, and it has been really cool to see what people have done with it. And we're gonna dig into that stuff here in just a moment. But first, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about my main man, my sworn enemy, my adversary, the greedy capitalist, Tom fucking Nook. Tom Nook is a capitalist bastard, and he should be dragged out to the city square and thrown into the ocean with an anchor around his neck. That's all I have to say about this.
Wow. So the counterpoint that I have to that is that you never have to actually pay your loan back. And as best I can tell, Tom Nook will never come after you for anything. So unlike my landlord, he won't evict you if you don't pay your shit. But also we wanted to talk a little bit, I think, about the like folklore around Tom Nook.
Yeah, because you've done a lot of interesting research into it. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I like truly this game has completely absorbed me during quarantine, and I've been watching so many videos about it and reading about it, and it's really interesting. And so this was a fun little bit of trivia I found. So people keep calling Tom Nook a raccoon, and he's actually not. He's a tanuki, which is I keep seeing it referred to as a raccoon dog, but it's not really from the raccoon family at all. It's I think mostly from the dog family, but it kind of has some raccoon elements, so like it looks a little bit raccoonish, so people call it a raccoon dog. Anyway, so the tanuki is really important in a certain area of like Japanese folklore. Like there's a very many stories about tanukis, and they have like a bunch of different like magical powers. So one of them is that they can like change their form into anything, and they can also change anything else into a different form. So they can change into like a government official, for example. This is one that I saw cited a lot. And they can come and collect taxes from you. And then they'll be like, oh, I'm a government official, give me your tax money, and then like go away, but they weren't actually a government official. I think this is a hilarious heist. But the way that they transform themselves is by putting a leaf on their head. And so also all the like Nook themed things that are leaf themed come from this as well. And they can from this like kind of like line of folklore. And they also will transform other things from leaves into other things. So, a tanuki might dress up as something else, hand you a bunch of money for something, and then the next morning you'll look in your wallet and the money they gave you actually was leaves. So I saw someone else citing that, I saw someone else saying that like the fact that all your furniture changes into leaves is not an accident either, because that's like what a tanuki would do.
Right.
The more bizarre part of all this, though, that you and I were talking about is the luck associated with the tanuki's balls. So this is a real thing.
Literal balls.
This is a literal
like
thing.
Testicles.
Yes, like testicles. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. So you'll see statues of tanuki with like huge balls, and it doesn't make any sense because the actual tanuki is just like a little woodland creature it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. But it turns out that they're associated with luck. And no one really knows like exactly why, but this is like a theory that has been floated. And I'm going to read from an article from Tofugu, which is like a Japanese culture website. So in the old days, metal workers in Kanawaza would wrap gold in the skin of a tanuki testicle when making gold leaf. You want to hammer the gold to the thinnest sheet possible. So you need a skin that can stretch a long way without breaking. It was said that a tanuki scrotum could reach the size of 8 tatami. When Which I don't know why you would know that. Why would you test that?
Hey, y'all, let's measure out. Let's see how many tatami can I fit within this tanuki scrotum.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody did it. What clinched it, though, was that the tanuki scrotum were being sold as... Wait, sorry. No, I won't clinched it. Okay, so what clinched it, though, was probably the pun ken no tama, small ball of gold, and kentama, slang for testicles. So the tanuki scrotum began to be sold as wallets and lucky charms, and it said to stretch your money the way that they stretched the gold. That is why, for example, the money in the game is called bells, like bells and balls. And I actually just was given today by Tom Nook. I was given a rug that was called the ball bell rug, and it was literally just like one of those sacks that
Nice.
you sometimes pick up, and it's called a ball bell rug, which I thought was hilarious. Yeah, so anyway, that's just like a fun bit of trivia about
incredible.
Tom Nook and the Tanuki that I found really enjoyable. And also all this folklore made them much more endearing to me, which I know that's not really fair. You're right. They're totally capitalist and whatever. And they like, early on in the island, they don't pay you for your labor. And look, I understand all of that, but I think that this story is hilarious.
It is hilarious. I mean, it's also funny because, balls. That's just funny.
It's so funny to me. And also, there's also a children's song about this, which just gives you kind of a sense of how different American culture is about body parts. Like, we would just never have like a children's song about balls. And like the lyrics of the song are like, even when the wind isn't blowing, the Tanuki's balls swing. That's like the lyrics. It's like a children's little
Oh my god, I'm gonna
nursery
find
rhyme.
that and cut that into this like as a sample. That's so fucking funny. That's amazing.
Yeah, so there you go. Tom Nook bringing us the lucky money balls. That's the situation on the island.
The last kind of big critique that I have of the game, and I think it's one that we both share, is the stalk market. Because, oh my god, the stock market, what a clusterfuck. I don't know if you've seen some of the pieces and articles on the internet about people literally hiring bouncers so that they can keep people out of their place while they're selling like to the stock market, or just like people on Discord hounding and like queuing up for hours on end so that they can sell their turnips on the stock market. So basically, for people who haven't played the game, there's a gimmick in the game where this cute little, like, I don't know, is she a cow or she's like some sort of like cute anthropomorphic animal. She comes onto your island every Sunday morning, and she will sell you turnips. And turnips have a price fluctuation. Sometimes they are cheap, and sometimes they are bought for really expensively, just like the stock market. And this fluctuation in the quote-unquote stock market has created and engendered around it a very competitive will for people to sell their turnips and collect bells in return. And so people have like taken to jumping onto Discord channels and networking with people all across the globe so that they can purchase, or rather so that they can sell their turnips and get the best return on them. And this has led to all sorts of shenanigans and chickenery that are quite, I think, disappointing in many ways. Like, why would you turn your like idyllic children's game into a gambling sim? Like, I don't know. That just seems it seems vacuous to me.
Yeah, I literally have not played the stock market even one time. It just doesn't bring me joy. Everything else is so fun in the game. Like, I love planting flowers. I love terraforming waterfalls. That's my favorite thing right now, just putting waterfalls and all over the place. But selling turnips, nope, doesn't spark joy. So I've just skipped it. Yeah, I don't really get that. Like, I trade things with my friends, as you know. Like, I'm like, oh wow, I love that plant, and we like trade things or whatever. Because that's fun to trade with your friends. But I don't think I would just like randomly hop around to other people's like strangers' islands and just like have a mad dash for resources of any kind. Just not my style of playing the game.
Yeah, no, for real. It's funny, like, there are, like, I'm reading an article right now from Polygon, called Animal Crossing New Horizons Turnip Stock Market is having its first panic. Just, like, you know, ridiculous, like, silly, like, speculative spikes of people, like, who are risking spoiling their turnips, because if you don't sell them by the week, then you lose your entire investment. And so, you know, they turn to this website called turnip.exchange, which we'll link to in the show notes, to see, like, if you can, like, go to this, like, place and get your, you know, turnips for the best return. It's just, it's very silly. And like Marie Kondo said, it does not spark joy.
No.
This does not bring us joy.
No.
So let's talk about the things that do bring us joy, though.
And there are plenty of those, lots of those.
Oh, yes, there are. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we poured such an obscene amount of time into this fucking game. So let's talk a little bit about, like, the fact that there's no work. Like, in this game, you don't have a job. No one really has a job. I mean, you could maybe, like, make the argument that you have, like, a position, but you don't really have a job. You're sort of like the resident services coordinator. You're able to kind of go through and experience this island and make it in whatever image you see fit. And the other characters in the game, you can invite villagers who are anthropomorphic, like, animals into your island, and they will live with you and share with you and celebrate with you and all this fun kind of stuff. But what's interesting is that you don't really have a job. Work has been essentially abolished in Animal Crossing. You don't have to do anything, right? You know, it's not only the maxim from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. It's like to each according to their ability and their volition. Like, right, if, like, they actually want to work, this, like, crucial kind of thing that I think anarchist kind of anti-work praxis and theory adds to Marx's theory of labor value, right? That you don't have to work, and you shouldn't have to work to enjoy the benefits of being a human being, especially in a post-scarcity society like the one depicted here in this game. And, you know, there are a handful of vague things that you could do if you wanted to, but there's no, like, penalty for not doing them, so you could just as well fuck off and do whatever you really like. And maybe you want to catch 5 fish for the day and you'll get some bonus points, or maybe you don't want to go fishing and you'd prefer to work on your roadways. Not a problem, go buck wild. And I think that that's a really interesting motif in the game. And I think it, you know, one of the things that I kind of also want to talk about and think about as a kind of a framing device, right, is, you know, this is a children's game, right, Liz? Like, it's meant for kids, and it's, you know, again, this is fucking silly what we're doing. We're talking about politics in a kid's game, but at the same time, it's really interesting because these are lessons that we're imparting on children, right? Like, we're giving kids these tools and saying, hey, like, here's this island, go and be free and do what brings you pleasure and joy, and don't stress about things, and just have a good time. And so it's interesting that, like, this idea, this motif of not working, of doing labor, of performing labor, but not doing work, which I think are two very separate and distinct things, is a really interesting, like, gaming mechanic in the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I love about the game. It's also, like, not only do you not work, but no one else seems to really work either, except for, like, the people who work in the, like, visitor center or whatever. Like, you see villagers looking at books, or, like, looking at flowers, or working out. Like, I feel like somebody's always working out on the island. And, you know, sometimes you'll see people, like, sweeping or something, but it seems like they're sort of sweeping communal areas. Like, they just want to, like, clean up the shared space or something. So I really appreciate it. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. I mean, like, just because something is for kids doesn't mean that it doesn't have politics. And actually, in a lot of ways, I feel like we should be even more careful about the politics in kids' games. Sometimes I worry about if I have kids, I'll, like, go off the deep end on you know, trying to instill in them good politics by only letting them read, like, quote unquote the right books or something. But, you know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, I mean, like there's still plenty of politics in kids games, and I think that it is good to, like, you know, give people sort of like free exploration of a game. Like, there's not really, like, you can try and build up your house, you can try and get like a better rating, but again, you can play the game indefinitely without having to progress to any level, without dying, you can just play the game however you want. And you can also get like more enjoyment out of different parts of the game if you're like paying more attention to things. So like if you're like, oh, like, let me try and like make this DIY recipe, or let me try and like crossbreed flowers or something like that. Like, those aren't things that really move you forward in the game. They're just sort of fun things you can do if you want to do them.
Totally.
But all of this reminds me of this like famous Marx quote that I pulled up for this. That is probably maybe my only really favorite Marx quote, if I had a favorite Marx quote. So he said, for as soon as the distribution of labor comes into being, each man has a particular exclusive sphere of activity, which is forced upon him, and from which he cannot escape. He is a hunter, a fisherman, a herdsman, or a critical critic, and must remain so if he does not want to lose his means of livelihood. While in a communist society where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society relegates the general production and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind without ever becoming a hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. So yeah, I mean, did Marx predict Animal Crossing? I think that's the big question in this quote, because it seems like he did. So
It's pretty spot on, yeah. No.
That's a point for Marx there.
Well, the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the idea of post-scarcity, because in this world, everything grows back. If you pluck cherries or oranges or peaches, they grow back. If you gather branches, they will fall again. If you dig up fossils, more fossils will just spontaneously appear. If you harvest ore or clay from rocks, the next day they will have more. And it's interesting to think about how plentiful resources are in the game, especially as you progress further and further and generate a larger and larger village that people can be invited to. And it's enormously difficult, if not impossible, to hoard resources in the game and create wealth, because you're so busy doing other things around the island to make it beneficial for not just yourself, not just because you like the way that it looks, but for everyone. And what's really interesting too is that once you start doing that, other people start like sitting on the benches that you make, or playing around the fountain that you build, or swinging on the swing sets that you provide, right? And you can see that not only is there post-scarcity, but there's no enclosure for the commons, right? Everything is free and open and available to all. You can just like walk into people's houses, knock on the door. If they're home, they let you in. You guys can hang out and chat. Sometimes they'll give you like recipes for, using your DIY recipes. Sometimes they'll be partying. It's all open and transparent and post-scarce. And I think that's one of the really visionary things about the game, that you're not forced to kind of create an inventory list that you have to micromanage. It's quite the opposite. It's where you just store things and you can come back and grab those things later. You can set new things up. You can build new structures. You can collect, if that's what like brings you joy. I think that's the single most animating feature of this game is do what brings you joy, which is fucking rad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that post-scarcity aspect to it for sure. And like, yeah, exactly. There's no enclosure of the commons. Like, you can make an orchard and anyone can walk into it and hang out into your orchard, and like people will give you all sorts of things. You'll be walking around your island and someone will just be like, "Hey, I got this shirt that made me think of you. Here's like a shirt for you," or something.
It's so nice.
And it's so nice. Yeah. I think and I think also like one of the things that sort of like strange about even the capitalist part of the game is that no matter what you make or have, you can always exchange it for something else in the game. Like, there's no, like, market restrictions like there are maybe, like, in real life. So you can make a DIY craft of a tire that was, like, a trash tire you found in the ocean, and you can exchange it with another villager for, like, a piece of clothing, or you can take it to the shop and sell it. And, like, everyone's just like, oh, wow, like, trash art. We love this. Here's 1,000 bells. Like, who cares? And I think that that's the other thing that I, like, love about the game is that there's, like, no judgment of anything you do or try to sell or trade. Like, everyone is just like, whoa, dope. Like, 3 pairs. I love it. Thank you. Like,
yeah, like, if you bring somebody something for their birthday, they're just like, this is the best gift ever. I've wanted this for so long.
yeah.
I've really had my eye on this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also like, yeah, there's just like there's no feeling that anyone is ever being stingy, and no matter, like, no one, it's just all purely like joy and positivity and cooperation, no matter what you're bringing to the table. And I love that. And I think it's also something that, like, that sort of feeling can only really exist in a world where it does feel post-scarcity. Because if, like, you know, your poor neighbor, like, was starving and you were like, I caught a bug for you, they would be like, this is a terrible gift. But since everyone lives in this post-scarcity world, they can be like, oh my god, you made me, like, a pair of boots out of boots that you dragged out of the ocean. That's weird, but I love it. That's amazing.
Yeah, like, everybody has a house, everyone's fed, you know, everyone has energy and electricity, everyone has running water. It's not only post-scarcity, but it's like, I mean, it's communist at the end of the day. Like, you know, everyone like really does, like, live in a kind of open and transparent and fluid and dynamic manner. I think the only thing that would make me say that it's not fully communist is that there's still money and there's still technically landlords.
Technically, yeah. The one thing about the money is that it's like, yeah, you can, like, make your house cooler with, like, buying little tea sets and stuff like that. But, like, again, you just don't have to. It's like a really strong social safety net at the very least. Yeah. No one's water is getting turned off. No one's getting evicted. Everyone's chilling.
Yeah. Totally. It reminds me sort of like, if not communist, then maybe libertarian socialist, you know, like, there's still, like, statist structures, but they are very much in decay. For sure. Well, what about the DIY ethic of it? Like, one of the central mechanics of the game revolves around finding, procuring. Sometimes you shoot them out of, like, balloons that are floating in the sky. Sometimes they wash up on the shores from random strangers in, like, you know, mysterious bottles that just have, like, a DIY recipe crammed inside of it. You know, you can collect these recipes, and then you can start making and acquiring and utilizing these recipes in order to discover new things about the world. You can create new items. You can send your DIY recipes to, like, real life friends via the internet. This ethic of do-it-yourself pervades the game. But I think really crucially, right, it's not this kind of, like, rugged individualism or this, like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, like, self-reliance. Rather, it's this, you know, actively beneficial type of DIY that intentionally cultivates relationships with the other villagers on your island. And, you know, the game doesn't really, I think one of my criticisms of the game that's on a more substantive and less political level is that the game doesn't really give me a desire to really invest in the characters. You can't have meaningful relationships like with them the way you can in other life sims, like, or RPGs like Stardew Valley. But the game still incentivizes, like, active collaboration with other villagers in the game. And I think that that's one of the things that I really, really like about it, is that even though you may not have a super rich or developed or complicated relationship with these villagers, you still have the assurance that they care about you and that they will provide for you and that you can have this sort of symbiotic affinity for one another.
Well, I do know that one of your villagers calls you comrade, and I think that they'd be very hurt to hear you say that they didn't have a real relationship with you.
Yes, the only reason why Rocket calls me comrade is because she asked if she could hey, do you like this nickname? And it used to be Vroom, and I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. And she's like, could I change it to something better? And I was like, yes, you can change it to comrade.
Nice.
Yeah, she actually came up to me this morning and was like, hey, I need a new catchphrase as well. And I was like, solidarity is your new catchphrase.
Oh, nice. See, look, you have such a, vibrant relationship with Rocket. I think she'd be really hurt.
She also loves pink like you, Liz. She's always dressed in pink.
It's funny because, everything in Animal Crossing is pink for me, but also, in real life, I have, a pink bike and pink sneakers, and I have 3 pairs of pink shoes. I have it's a little unhinged. That so yeah, the DIY stuff is great. I feel like one of the things I like about this game is that it actually kind of inspires me in real life as well. I'm I could just make a bookshelf, because honestly you can make a bookshelf, you know what I mean? We totally. Just don't do that. But I love that aspect, and I think you're right. It's not rugged individualism, especially since a lot of the crafts are just fun. It's not they protect you from floods or protect you from a marauding band of, I don't know, the pillagers or something. That they don't have any function really except to just decorate your house, which is the funnest thing about the game. Totally.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's interesting too, there's a very usufructian kind of basis for the game as well. If things are not being used by other people, you can use them. So, for example, if you walk into one of your villagers' houses and they have a DIY workbench and you want to use it, you just walk right up to it and start using it, right? If there are stones lying around, you can just pick them up. If someone drops the DIY recipe, you can just pick it up. And, the idea here being that things only have utility insofar as they are being utilized by human beings, or rather, for this case, anthropomorphic critters. So, the principle remains that as long as a thing is being used, it can be sort of wielded or held by a discrete individual. But as soon as it's not being used anymore, it's returned to the commons, and it becomes something that people can use in tandem to benefit the community in some way, shape, or form. Our mutual friends in Seriously Wrong have a great episode on the sort of usufructian nature of what they call library socialism, which I'll try to link to in the show notes. It's an excellent episode if you haven't checked it out in the past.
Yeah, I love the idea in real life of just having there's the tool library on every block, and you can just go down there and borrow the tools, or take your little DIY craft and use it at the tool library. This makes so much sense. It just is actually bizarre that it doesn't exist. Sometimes It's so common sense. I love that. The other thing I wanted to say about the DIY aspect and the crafts and such is that even though you can go and just sell things at the store for bells, the game really incentivizes you to talk to your villagers. You can give a villager some silly craft, and they'll give you either something that's worth way more than the craft or many more bells, because they'll just be I'm so grateful you made this craft for me. So still at the end of the day, maybe you're just compiling resources, but still it's the game does it when you interact with your villagers, and you will have a better experience overall if you're not just going to the store and unloading all of your just bulk resources.
100%. It's much more expedient to just go to the store and sell shit off, but you're going to get more bells or better items if you go to the villagers and talk with them and build the relationships with them, which again is really fucking cool on a mechanics level, because it's reinforcing the idea of community in many ways, right? And not subverting the capitalist mode or the market per se, but it is reinforcing, I think, the importance and the vitality of community, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and again, in real life, you will have a better experience if you're connecting your friends with things that they need rather than just trying to like dump a bunch of things, or like, I don't know. I like the idea that like this is how our world should operate, is that we just like are constantly connecting each other with things that we need.
Well, speaking of connecting people with the things that they need, there's also no borders on these islands, right? The entire fucking digital game world is just islands, right? Islands of different, users who are sharing their content with their villagers, and you can go visit each other. Like we said at the top of the episode, you and I have visited each other's islands now on numerous occasions. Your islands are occasionally populated with these alienated and lonely villagers out there in the wild that you can fly to and collect resources from, and you can say, hey, like, come back with me to my island and come join me. We have plenty and you're welcome to join us. And they get super excited. And then the next day you wake up and you go outside and voila, they have moved in and they have a house now and they are beginning to unpackage their things. And then the next day they're, starting to explore the island and meet the other villagers. And, you can invite your real friends to come visit your island via online play. And it's delightful because you get to just like run around and be like, hey, I built this park, or hey, I have all these cool things in my museum, or hey, like I have these fish that we can collect, or hey, I have these DIY recipes. Here you go. You can send mail to people. It's delightful.
It is delightful. Yeah, my friend actually took this one level further by setting up a community garden on their island. And so anytime anyone visits, they're like, these are the flowers and DIY recipes that I don't need. Just help yourself to anything.
I'm fucking doing that.
I know,
I'm totally
right?
fucking doing that. I'm totally fucking doing that.
Yeah, they were like, oh, I accidentally like bred too many of these hybrids. You can have this pink flower. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So
that's sick.
So cute. Yeah. So I love this aspect of the game too, but the one thing that I did want to bring up is that, much like every other aspect of the game, real life tends to impose itself on this beautiful utopian game. So we do have the situation where, well, there's some very cool images coming out of Hong Kong where people were taking the protest to Animal Crossing and like getting together with their friends and having little demonstrations on their beaches. And China actually removed it from sale in China. Like they removed Animal Crossing from being on sale in China. So this is very sad. Not part of the game.
The Communist Party of China.
Yes, the Communist Party of China, known for its
communism,
utopian, tendencies. So just like every other aspect of the game, real life just is gonna squeeze its way in there, which is a bummer. But yes, the game itself does not have borders. You do have passports though, which does seem to think that there's some sort of thing going on there. But
yeah, but what's interesting about the passports though, Liz, is there's a thing that ties you to your island, but there's no like, and you have a friend code, but the friend code isn't like a nationality, right? It's a way to connect with other players, right? It's another tool that you can use to link up with people you may never have met before, but maybe you found somebody on the internet and they have a particular resource and you want to trade with them. Well, great, you can now send it to them via the mail system, right? And so, like, to me, like, the thing that's really interesting about the passport system is, like, you can take your own picture, you can give yourself a title, right? So, like, my name is Autonomous Wallflower right now. Like,
I'm a Lucky Gardener.
Lucky Gardener. I think it used to be Autonomous Wallflower. I think it's Autonomous Punk now, which is more fitting for me. But regardless, it's interesting that the game has these certain trappings, I think, of contemporary life, but have accentuated them in these certain ways that make them more community-based and community-driven. Mm-hmm. And again, it doesn't sort of paint away, again, some of the legitimate criticisms that we levied against the game earlier, but it does open up these really interesting imaginative possibilities, not just for young children playing the game, but also for adults like you and I who are engaging with it, or kids at heart, rather, engaging with it, and imagining the alternatives of the ways that it could be. I know you also wanted to talk a little bit about urban planning, so...
Oh, yeah. So, one of the things I love about this game is, as we've been saying, you can just do whatever you want. So if you see an improvement that needs to be made, you can do that. So if you compare that to like normal everyday life, like in New York, we are constantly asking for more bike lanes that are actually safe, and they're just never being put up. And then even when the city does try and do it, a lot of time landowners like push back on it. Compare that to Animal Crossing. If I want to put up an orchard, I put up an orchard. You know, it's just really nice. And like, you know, I think one of the things that like anarchists do or talk about a lot is like, you know, graffiti or stickers or things like that. And in a lot of ways, those are like very small examples of like changing your environment in a way that you like, you know what I mean? Like being like, oh, you know what? We need some political art here. We need some propaganda here because this, you know, these streets are a street. This is a street that I live on, and I want to improve the way it looks, either with flowers or art or whatever. And Animal Crossing really encourages that, and I love that. I love that. Because like to me, like one of the things that really draws me to anarchism is that like at its core, society is this human-made thing. It's not something that's exists outside of us, like with immovable rules. And you know, if humans made it, humans can change it to be more fitting for human life. And in Animal Crossing, you have the opportunity to make the perfect island, or your perfect island, rather. and I just love that.
It's one of those interesting things where you have the ability to actively imagine something and then bring it into being, right? Like you have all the tools that you need at your disposal to build something and to create something that you can enjoy and that other people can enjoy as well. And I guess kind of in closing, the kind of thing that I wanted to ask you about is kind of twofold. So the first thing that I'm curious about is I feel like so many people, and it's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this episode on a more kind of serious note. Like, I feel like so many people in this moment in particular are so fucking dejected and feel really powerless. And I think that people turn to things that bring them joy and bring them pleasure at times like these, right? For you and I, it's playing this wholesome video game. For other people, it might be reading, it might be going for walks, it might be gardening, whatever it might be. But what's interesting is that we seem to have like lost our capacity to imagine better worlds. It's almost like people are afraid to be labeled uncool because they're not being cynical enough, right? Like, oh, you're not, you know, you actually are dewy-eyed and actually believe this crazy shit. Like, you're just silly and vapid, or, you know, whatever it might be, right? So Mark Fisher has this idea, right, of capitalist realism, where there is a particular way of thinking and being in the world that follows the capitalist mode of production, is ideologically bound up in it. It is inseparable from it, right? The sort of Thatcherite axiom that there is no alternative to capitalism. And I think in so many ways, even for many people on the left, that's so fucking ingrained into our brains that this is all there is, right? And we don't even dare to hope or to dream or to imagine, right? And I wanted to maybe take some time here at the end of the discussion to talk a little bit about the differences between utopianism and dystopia, but then also I think a crucial third term, which I've become more and more interested in as time goes on, which is this idea of anti-anti-utopianism. Right? Like there's our, you know, first thesis, which is utopianism, our second thesis, which is dystopia, and our third thesis, which is, or our synthesis, which is anti-utopianism. And I think that, you know, on the one hand, we have utopia, we have like, oh, the possibility that the world can be a better place. We have dystopia. Everything sucks. It's always going to suck. Why don't even like imagine that it could ever be better, because everything's going to be garbage forever and ever and ever and always. And then you have I think the synthesis of this initial thesis and antithesis, which is, okay, yes, things are bad now, and we shouldn't just recede into escapism and to fanciful dreaming and not actually do anything, right? But the idea of anti-utopianism says, okay, we have to look at where we're at now, and we also have to look at where we want to be, and we have to start making steps and strides towards getting there. And I think that, you know, the left is really good at doing one or the other, right? We're good at being really dystopian, or we're good at being really utopian. But I think that more than ever, we need to be anti-utopian. We need to be rethinking and reimagining not just, the pessimism and the cynicism, not just the optimism and the hope, but also like what are the real material ways that we can actually make the world a better place. And it's one of the reasons why I'm glad we got to talk about this this game together, both because you and I both love it, but also because you and your sister Amy do the show Rebel Steps, and there's literally exactly what Rebel Steps is all about, right? It's about giving people something concrete, like having praxis in a digestible, coherent, and straightforward manner. And I think that if we can't figure out ways to do what you and Amy are doing more, then we will be fucked. Like we will descend into chaos and barbarism and madness. And I think it's only with the measured hope, the fool's hope of anarchism that we can actually get to the next horizon, and know that there's still going to be another horizon further down the way, but we can go to that horizon, and then we can go to that next horizon, and keep going and keep going and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't get a 5-star island overnight, right? So to go back to our Animal Crossing, to cross our Animal Crossing discussion with this anti-utopianism, some days you got to work on a few waterfalls. The next day you got to put in a few paths. Maybe in revolutionary terms, that means, a few times a month you help out with Food Not Bombs. A few times a month you go to a protest. Every once in a while you go to a meeting. And eventually we'll get to that revolution / 5-star island. It's not going to be... It's not going to be one big moment. It's going to be something that we're building to for a long time, And I think, I talk about hope a lot on the podcast because I think I get a lot of this from Rebecca Solnit's book, Hope in the Dark.
I love Rebecca Solnit. Such a good essayist.
Yeah, it's a really, really good book. And she makes this differentiation between optimism, which is I don't have to do anything because everything's going to be fine, it'll all be fine, and hope. And hope means that there's space to act. There's literally an opportunity to take action. And, as leftists right now, when we're envisioning these other worlds, I think a lot of people tend to just be like, well, if we didn't do a full revolution, we failed, this is garbage. But, we got to build to that. I think, I know you and I both have sort of, maybe this sort of ties into our ideas on the whole Bernie campaign too, where there's a lot of people that are just well, Bernie lost, so I guess now who cares about anything, or oh, we really screwed up. But it's no, I mean, that was one thing that some people were working on. There's a lot of other steps that we can take forward, and there's a lot of other steps that people are taking forward if you look at
totally.
Mutual aid and stuff.
Just because we lost one battle does not mean we lost the war.
Yeah, and we can't afford to lose the war. So we gotta keep up the fight however we can, even if it's just in little ways.
100%, my friend, 100%. Before I let you go, and before we both, I'm sure, inevitably return to playing Animal Crossing.
You know it. That's exactly where I'm going after this. Going back to clocking into island time.
So, is ACNH communist? Is it capitalist? Is it some synthesis of the two?
I'm gonna say it's more communist than capitalist.
Okay, say more. Why?
I think I'm gonna go with it's maybe 60% communist. Okay, so
60-40. If we had to do a
60,
ratio.
Yeah, I'm gonna go 60-40. Here are my reasons. One, no one gets evicted, which is something that's very important to me right now. There's no lawyers or police on this island that are protecting the property or anything like that. Everyone has their utilities taken care of. No one's starving. It doesn't seem like they have socialized medicine because you have to buy the medicine, but it also seems like no one gets sick, so it's not really that big of a deal. It's very community-based. We don't have the enclosure of the commons. So, what are the things that are actually capitalist about it? Well, you can pay back a loan if you want. you can buy things, but you really don't have to. And also the people that are capitalists are these sort of weird magical woodland creatures. So, like, I mean, that's just hard for me to be mad about. You know what I mean? So actually, you know what? I'm going to revise. I'm going to say 70% communist, 30% capitalist. That's my final entry.
Final answer.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. No, I'm with you. I think that there are definitely much more communistic and communal aspirations in the game than there are capitalist ones. You know, I would love, Liz. I mean, I would fucking love for once for there to be a video game where there isn't some kind of monetary system. Like every game has some kind of, you know, money system, some type of currency. And I would just love for there to be a game that does not have some kind of transactional type of relationship. I don't know if anyone's ever created that game. If you're listening to this and you're a game maker, or if you're listening to this and you know a game that I should play that doesn't have money in it, sign me the fuck up, because that sounds awesome. But, you know, that's my biggest like hiccup with it. It's like, why does there have to be money? Why couldn't it be some other type of, you know, like experience, right, or something like that you collect or trade, or like knowledge or something. Like, there are so many different ways that we could potentially think about currency, and I think that it's one of the interesting like vectors of like video games, after having played an obscene amount of video games, that hasn't really been explored in the way that a lot of other interesting themes have been explored in video games. So maybe one day someone will do that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that would make it more communist is if, like, your villagers had to interact with you when you're doing infrastructure. So, like, if you, like, proposed...
Yeah, it's, like participatory.
A staircase, and then they were like, oh, we don't like the staircase here, and you had to, like, talk to everyone about it. Now, all of my villagers are super nice, and they'd probably be like, whoa, that's so cool. Like, I can't imagine anyone being mad about it. But it's kind of weird that you're just, like, kind of, like, czar of infrastructure, and you just get to, like... You're just like, oh, I'm just going to, like, put this up. So that'd be another thing that I think would make it more communist. Agreed. That there's, like, a council aspect to the game where you had to, like, cooperate.
Or, like, popular assemblies or something where everybody has to, like, hook up in the town hall at the center of the island and just be like, hey, so Liz over here, she's got this idea about a staircase. What do y'all think? Well, you know, I think that the staircase could be really nice, but do we really want to go with stone, or do we want to go with wood? You know, that would be a cool little mechanic, but, you know, alas, here we are. At any rate, this has been a great conversation. Liz, thank you for joining me. This has been a truly wholesome as fuck episode, and I'm glad that we got to do it together. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me and chat with me.
Before we go, I have to just thank my housemate whose Switch that I use. Nice. I don't actually own a Switch. My housemate has graciously allowed me to live on the island that he started. So shout out to my housemate Steven for letting me play Animal Crossing literally like 4 hours a day on the Switch that he bought before quarantine.
Hell yeah. Shout outs to Steven. Well, Liz, thank you, my friend. I cherish you, cherish your friendship. I think your show is fucking phenomenal. If you're listening to this and you haven't checked out Rebel Steps, first of all, why the fuck are you listening to this podcast? Go listen to Rebel Steps and get organized, and then come back and listen to this silly episode. Regardless, you're great. Love you lots. And I'll see you in the game.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that about does it for this week's episode of Coffee with Comrades. This is an entirely DIY show run by workers for workers. If you like what you hear, you can follow us on Twitter at CoffeeWComrades and Instagram at CoffeeWithComrades. Check out our website, www.coffeewithcomrades.com, and sign up to support our work with a monthly contribution by going to www.patreon.com/coffeewithcomrades. You can find Coffee with Comrades on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you go to get your anti-capitalist propaganda. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. While you're there, smashing that subscribe button, be sure to rate and review the show as well to help us increase our reach. If you have feedback, criticism, or you'd just like to get in touch with us, shoot us an email at coffeewithcomrades@gmail.com. Until next time, stay wild out there, comrades.